and certainly chaos and everything going wrong is all part of the Dharma, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, Thinking that we have everything under control is just an illusion. So, uh, and certainly making mistakes is also. There's a great line from Suzuki Roshi in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, where he says a Roshi's life. I think he says a Roshi's life, is one continuous mistake. I've taken that as an inspiration. I love that idea of just accepting that we slip up in many ways, and when we meditate, of course, it's kind of one continuous mistake, and trying to bring it back. But so I'm not worried, and the idea that there needs to be a certain number of people there before it's worth teaching is another flawed concept. So I'm happy to have a nice, small, intimate group to practice with, and so we'll start with a period of meditation, and I usually like to guide for about half the time, so for 10 or 15 minutes. I'll talk and give some suggestions about practice, and then drop off and let you have some quiet time to practice on your own. So just settling into your meditative posture, particularly since people are able to be in their own personal space, you can situate your body in whatever way works for you. Whether it's upright or lying down, standing, walking, the four classic postures. And you can close your eyes, or you can just lower your gaze. For some people, it's more comfortable to have their eyes open. But in either case, it gives us time to take away from looking at a screen, so we're not caught in that particular way of being that can be so wearing, tiresome. And as you settle, just turning the attention inwards first to the feelings in the body, sensations in the body, the feeling of sitting. Feeling the breath moving in the body. Letting the breath calm the body. Releasing any points of tension. Relaxing the jaw, the shoulders. Softening the belly. Opening the chest, the heart center. Just bringing a sense of ease. Nothing to accomplish. Being present and awake. Noticing any underlying feelings that are stirring up the mind. agitating the body, and breathing with these, not struggling or suppressing, just letting energies move through, feelings as energies. It's natural for the mind to wander, and so we bring patience and acceptance to the wandering mind, just gently bringing the attention back to the breath each time the mind wanders, feeling the sensations of breath, the touch of air at the nostrils or the movement of the belly. As we settle, we might become more drowsy, so just opening the eyes or straightening the posture a bit just to stay alert, balancing the energy of calming with the brightening and clarity of mind. Even as we use the breath as a focal point, acknowledge other perceptions, sounds, sensations, thoughts, and feelings. Any experience that strongly enters our awareness, we turn attention to that, at least for a few moments. Again, not resisting, not striving, just being present, investigating, feeling, allowing, then using the breath again to return, to settle, to release any tension or disturbance in body or mind. Notice especially the tone or quality of thoughts. Are you turning on yourself? Is there judgment, self-judgment, irritation? We can turn meditation into a competition or a way of determining our worth if we are present, if the mind wanders. So cultivating an attitude of kindness and acceptance, not striving for some ideal or perfection. We understand that the mind wanders, that's its nature. We come to see that we don't actually control what we consider to be our own mind. Just in this simple process of placing the attention on the breath, seeing the mind wander, bringing the attention back. We see the key insights of the Dharma, of the Buddha. See impermanence in the movement of mind, never truly still, mind and body in flux. We see the unsatisfactory nature of mind and body, never able to satisfy us. We see the impersonal nature of mind and body, We don't control them. We don't own them. They are not ours. They do not define us. So we let go with kindness. All right. Well, welcome everybody who's and managed to make it. These when we're working across multiple time zones, and then the time changes in one place and it doesn't change in another place, it can definitely get confusing. So I'm glad people figured out to come. I think many of you weren't here when George introduced me. So I'm Kevin Griffin. We can just we can maybe put my website in the chat just for people to, if they want to know more about me. I'm out in California, in Berkeley, and so I wanted to talk today kind of about the whole of the Eightfold Path and structurally, and particularly starting with the Sila element. But first, to talk about the Eightfold Path. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but the eight factors are the right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And traditionally, they're sort of divided into three sections that are meant to kind of characterize the path as a developmental process. So starting with it's called Sila, or morality, right, which is right action, right speech, right livelihood, the kind of behavioral elements of the path, are seen as kind of a foundation that we need to kind of, in order to build a spiritual path, we need to start by living a wholesome life. And that then lays the foundation for the meditation part of the path, the right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So the idea being that if we are living in an unwholesome way, if we try to meditate, it'll be difficult to focus the mind, to have any clarity. And then out of that development of mind training, sometimes samadhi is called mind training, that one develops insight, right view, and right intention. But I would say that, particularly in the West, that not many people really come to the path in that way. That many people start with the mind training, with the meditative part, and then develop the other factors. Others, do some study, read a book, and are inspired by the insights they read about, and are guided by that and motivated by that, and then decide, oh, I'm going to start to meditate, and then maybe later pick up the more behavioral aspects, the ethical elements. So there is no real, even though there's this sort of classical way of viewing it, there is no one way to enter and work through the path. And in fact, the factors are all interwoven and interrelated, and develop really in partnership. So I want to read a little bit from Bhikkhu Bodhi, the great translator of the early texts, from his classic book, The Noble Eightfold Path. And he does one chapter on the Sila aspects of the path. And his language is quite high and dense, so I'm going to slow it down and take it apart a little bit. This is chapter 4. If you happen to have the book, it's page 43, right speech, right action, right livelihood. So he says, though the principles laid down in this section of the path, restrain immoral actions and promote good conduct, their ultimate purpose is not so much ethical as spiritual. They are not prescribed merely as guides to action, but primarily as aids to mental purification. So I've always been, moved by that phrase, the mental purification, and what that points to. It's not talking about, being this perfect ideal person who never does anything wrong and never says the wrong thing. But it's also interesting because, mindfulness and the mind training aspects of the path seem to be the most obvious ones that are about mental purification. And so, we can reflect on this. There's no one way of thinking about what that means, but the point he's getting to is that the sila, the ethical elements of the path are not just about developing good karma, and he addresses that in the next couple of sentences. So he says, they are not prescribed merely as guides to action. Well, I'm sorry, I just read that. As a necessary measure for human well-being, ethics has its own justification in the Buddhist teaching, and its importance cannot be underrated. So, as a necessary measure for human well-being, ethics has its own justification in the Buddhist teaching. Of course, anybody who's explored Buddhism to any extent knows that the law of karma is critical to the Buddhist teaching, and that what you do, how you think, speak, and act is going to determine, at least be key to determining how your life unfolds. And of course, in the early Buddhist version, that applies then to rebirth. I don't think we need to get into that particularly to see that, of course, like how I live is really going to affect how my life plays out. But he's saying that's not what's really in terms of the Eightfold Path, which is about attaining enlightenment or spiritual awakening, the karmic aspects aren't as important as this idea of mental purification. He says, but in the special context of the Noble Eightfold Path, ethical principles are subordinate to the path's governing goal, final deliverance from suffering. Thus, for the moral training to become a proper part of the path, it has to be taken up under the tutelage of the first two factors, right view and right intention, and to lead beyond to the training in concentration and wisdom. So again, he's placing sila as interconnected with the other elements of the path. And a couple more sentences. Though the training in moral discipline is listed first among the three groups of practices, it should not be regarded lightly. It is the foundation for the entire path, essential for the success of the other trainings. The Buddha himself frequently urged his disciples to adhere to the rules of discipline, seeing danger in the slightest fault. One time, when a monk approached the Buddha and asked for the training in brief, the Buddha told him, first, establish yourself in the starting point of wholesome states, that is, the purified moral discipline, and in right view. Then, when your moral discipline is purified and your view straight, you should practice the four foundations of mindfulness. So this then, brings us to right view, how that's related to this. So right view it has two main elements to it: the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, which is how suffering arises and how suffering ends, and the understanding of the law of karma, cause and effect. So already we can see this intertwining, since clearly the sila path, the parts of the path, are the particularly causal and behavioral. But the idea is then that we see how suffering arises, and we see how unwholesome actions cause suffering. We're not, to me, the beauty of Buddhism is that it's so practical. It's not that we're motivated by some potential, punishment we're going to get if we do the wrong thing, if we break the precepts, but rather that we understand that this is just how suffering arises. So ultimately, I get no benefit from breaking the precepts. If I think that by stealing something from someone, I'm going to get a benefit from that, I understand that ultimately I'm not going to benefit from it. There's going to be regret. There's going to be potential, punishment, external, but internal punishment. This is what the Buddha is always pointing to, that it's our own minds that really punish us. So, the teaching on morality, is founded in what's called hiri and ottappa. Hiri is that internal voice, the that knows things are wrong. I kind of call on this when I'm frustrated with the world and the way things are going in the world, and particularly right now in our country, things are going very poorly, as from my viewpoint. And when I see the harm that gets done, that by people who are, in one sense, breaking the precepts as well as breaking the law, but breaking the precepts, I have to remind myself that ultimately they're not bringing themselves happiness, that they may think that they are getting something, but that ultimately they're causing themselves harm. So, to look a little bit at the precepts, I think, can be useful. And again, kind of in a practical way, the first precept is the precept to not kill, but I think of it as even more broadly about not to do harm to others. And so that even things like rage and anger, are kind of held in this precept. And the Buddha talks so much about anger as a harmful emotion. There's a lot of emotions he doesn't talk about that are more common in contemporary life, but he addresses anger, and he says that anger actually gives your enemy what they want, that anger will make you ugly, that it will cause you agitation, disturb your mind. It will make it hard for you to sleep. We all know what it's like to be filled with anger, that burning feeling in our body and our mind. And, many people are familiar with the image the Buddha has of it's like picking up a hot coal to throw at your enemy, thinking that I'm going to harm them, but I'm the one who gets burned by that. And that's a great image, very apt image for anger, because anger does have this physical quality of feeling like heat in the body. The second precept, to not take what's not given. Again, I was talking to someone the other day about the idea of cheating in sports and how unfulfilling that seems to me. Like that what joy does someone take when they win by the numbers, but they haven't actually won? Like, it's a very empty kind of success. In the same way that wealth is totally unsatisfying. We see how these billionaires and oligarchs who obviously are trapped in this delusion that consumption, of that accumulation, will bring some satisfaction to them, and instead of satisfaction, it just breeds more and more craving. Just the as the Buddha says, whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind. So if you think and ponder upon accumulation, then all that you will think about is accumulating more and more. And once you have this vast amount of money, all you can do then is think about your money. And for anybody who, all of us think about money. We all worry about money. But is that where you want your mind to be all the time? It's such a vision of pain and suffering, and the great, image of in Buddhism of the hungry ghost, the being that has a giant belly and a very tiny throat that can never be satisfied. This really captures that idea of the unsatisfactory nature of consumption. So to me, that kind of greed that's particularly embodied in the second precept, to not take what's not given, is just so fruitless and pointless. And again, if we understand the Four Noble Truths, if we understand how craving causes suffering, then we're not drawn into that. We let go of that. And, it speaks to, as much as there's sort of this culture of admiration of the wealthy, as if they are, better than others. And of course, that's how they want to see themselves. But what they're really revealing is their ignorance, their lack of wisdom. They may have a certain kind of intelligence, the type of intelligence that knows how to consume or to cheat, but it's not an intelligence that a Buddhist would admire. It's because it's foolish, ultimately. The third precept is the precept on sexual harm, and that is so pervasive and operates on so many levels. Obviously, there's horrifying levels of sexual harm, but just the way societies are built to prefer and to give more privilege to men over women is to me an element of breaking this precept that again creates this suffering for everybody involved. I've always been struck by the how strange it is that in certain cultures the men want to cover women's bodies, and what that points to me is that the suffering, they actually recognize that lust causes suffering, but they don't understand how to work with that in a wholesome and skillful way. That it's like, I don't want to see women's bodies because it triggers lust, and lust is painful for me. And maybe they put some moral, judgment on lust as well. But again, from a profoundly, really the most meaningful level of Buddhist teaching is that lust is painful. And so we let it go, not because it's bad or evil, but because it hurts us. It's very selfish in a way, but in a constructively selfish way, if we can say. This is how the precepts are not, again, designed just so that, you behave well in the world. They're protections for us. The fourth precept, and this isn't even meant to be a talk on the precepts in terms of elucidating every aspect of them. I'm just sort of touching on a few different points. Fourth precept is on right speech and not lying, not harming with speech. And, this is, it's said, I've been told by monastics that this is the precept that's broken the most in monasteries. So if it's hard for monks to follow this precept, we can imagine that it's quite difficult for lay people or for anyone to follow it. So, again, something that we're going to break. This is something that I do want to say about all the precepts, that it's not that we're expected to be perfect at following the precepts, rather that we see them as ways to protect and guide our practice and our lives, and as ways for mental purification, because we see how when we break the precepts, how our minds become agitated. There's guilt, there's shame, there's fear. If we're caught in a lie, but it's interesting too that how powerful speech is. The disinformation, we see how lies and how disinformation sways entire populations to make unwise choices. And so, speech is so vital. And, I was just reading some suttas this morning where the Buddha talks about the key elements for enlightenment. One of the 4 key elements is to hear the Dharma. And how do we hear the Dharma? Is through speech, right? Of course, it might be written speech, but it's speech nonetheless, the use of language. And then the 5th precept, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I identify as an addict, and this precept was the one that actually made my practice develop. I started meditating before I got sober, and I certainly got some benefit from that, and had some meaningful meditative experiences. But it was only when I started to work the 5th precept and take on the sila aspect of the path that my meditative experience really deepened, and my insight deepened. We need all elements of the path to awaken, and I do think, and the reason I took up this topic, the sila, as kind of a central topic today, is because I think it tends to be neglected in Buddhist circles, in Dharma teaching circles, and I understand that. The language of the suttas, that's a lot of the original translations come out of the 19th century, and they can have this moralistic tone, and many of the people that are drawn to Buddhism in the West are kind of trying to get away from the oppressive morality of Christianity and other religions that seem to be about punishment and about controlling people. And there's not a lot of a compassion embodied in the 10 Commandments, and I don't even mean this I don't mean this to be an attack on Christianity or other religions. It's rather the way, because I believe that the origins of each of the great religions are very beautiful and powerful and embody love and compassion, but so often it's human beings who later take these teachings, and we see the same thing. Buddhism is corrupted as well, many places. Where the purity of the original teachings that embody wisdom and compassion get diluted and perverted by men who have power in the world, and then use the religion as a way to oppress people. So this is not about any particular religion. It's the way what people do with religions. And but getting back to this, people come to the Dharma because it's very often they see it as this more scientific and not a faith-based, and I appreciate all that, but we don't want to lose the underlying ideas that are embodied in the precepts that are, as I've said, meant to protect us. And Bhikkhu Analayo, another famous modern contemporary scholar, actually makes a beautiful point about how the following the precept is actually an act of compassion, but that by practicing non-harming in whatever ways we can, that we are actually acting out of compassion for the rest of the world. And one of my reflections is that if everybody in the world just followed one of the precepts, the world would be a completely different place. We don't even need the world to follow all 5 precepts. If nobody in the world lied, think what the world would be like. And most of us don't walk around in our lives lying, but enough people do that there's tremendous harm that comes from it. If there was no sexual harm in the world, we'd be in a completely different world if sexism and misogyny didn't exist. So that, I think, is one way for us to, a twist, I hope, on the thinking about the precepts that makes us realize their power and their importance. But again, coming back to this idea of mental purification, it's one of the ways we can watch our minds in meditation, is see how if the agitation in our minds is related to one of these precepts, and if there's something we want to do around that to try to fulfill the precepts more completely. And again, I think it's so important to recognize that we're never going to be perfect with the precepts. That's just the nature of being a human being. And to me, forgiveness and self-compassion around any failings is vital in order to proceed on the path without just creating it as another way of judging ourselves. So I hope these words are of some benefit today. I'm glad that a nice number of folks came. I don't know how many usually come, George, so I'm very happy to have 34 people here. So I appreciate being invited here, and we have some time left if people have any comments or questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm just saying a few words which I usually don't, because now it's time for people to ask their questions or come just open up their mics and cameras. But I do want to appreciate your presence. And yes, it feels like a good surprise to have 36 people online. We usually have a little more. It should be around 50. And usually much more people registered, but not all of them come to the session online. They will just watch the recording afterwards, which they will, because the recording will be sent, and I will send it to you as well. And I will just take the theme of the precepts that you so well and so attuned to the times we're living. You took them in a very well way, attuned to these times. To apologize, because this was the fact that we're not as many as we could be here today is due to a primal mistake. I mean, I just realized that it just took once. We do need to have a human hand to do things. This is very much automated, but in order to have the sessions, I need to organize the sessions, to get in touch with teachers, to organize schedules and times. And it just takes one time to be wrongly set to end up in this huge mistake. So I'm trying not to take that very hard on myself, and to be, well, just to ask all your forgiveness and your understanding and comprehension. And yeah, we have time for your reflections and your questions. And personally, I think there's a lot of there are a few things that could be aired, like why do so many people lie so much, and why
Yeah.
we do have this thread of following some consistent lies that eventually have brought us into this chaos we're living in this moment. And it's
Yeah.
something that really, it's like we've been after 2,500 years. And if the Buddha could come back now and be taken into the West and travel, maybe not even only the West, maybe he could stay east, and I
Sure.
would be rather surprised to see what he had to say. I mean, um, okay, this is just my reflection on this. Please, if you have any questions, um, just raise your digital hand. You have a small um, little heart it's the bottom of the screen. If you take that, if you click on that, it will raise your digital hand, and you can just open up your mic and ask a question, or say if you have any comments, anything from here to the sky, anything. Feel free. The space is yours.
Well, people are getting up the nerve. I'll say that I think the Buddha would be not in the least bit surprised by the way people behave today. The technology might surprise him, but the behavior, I think he would just go, oh, greed, hatred, and delusion. that's same as it ever was. I mean, I was just looking at the sutta on where he's talking to Ajatasattu, who's the king who murdered his father. His father was King Bimbisara, and King Bimbisara he he abdicated to give Ajatasattu the throne, but Ajatasattu was afraid that he would come back, and so he had him executed. And the Buddha, interacted with him. He knew him. He tried to teach him, but he knew that because he'd killed his father, he would never really attain much in his spiritual growth. But certainly he knew this kind of behavior, this kind of thinking that, and so that to me is one of the comforting things in a way that it's not that things have gotten worse. Things are just kind of the way they've always been. There's always these people in power will always behave like people in power, and very few wise people are drawn to power. Relatively, I would say. There's a certain numbers for sure. But anyway, I don't need to turn this into a political diatribe. We all have enough of that. But yeah, please, I welcome any kind of questions or comments, and certainly it doesn't have to be on the topic of the day. It can be on anything that's on your mind about practice or Dharma. Uh, oh, well. There we go, a brave person. Kate, go ahead. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you, Kevin. I just so enjoyed your talk. Um, It was just so brilliant.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
I I find that I isolate myself a lot from the world in order to try to maintain the precepts. And I wonder if you have any advice on for how to engage more with the world while still maintaining the precepts as best we can. Thank you
Mm,
so much again. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah,
namaste.
yeah. Thank you for that question. A good question. I mean, I think this is what a lot of people, Buddhist or not, are trying to sort out how much to engage and how to maintain their balance, their inner balance. And yeah, if framing it as the precepts, uh, you know, that we don't get into conflict with people, that, um, and and there is no easy answer to that. I think it's really important for me. It's really important to have my daily meditation practice that helps me maintain an emotional balance. So when I start the day by sitting, there's a kind of softening that happens in my heart, mind, and then I need to keep a certain amount of you know wisdom, or sort of as a partner, and compassion, so that as I engage in the world, I remember this is all impermanent. It's and it's not satisfactory, but it's okay. I can be with this. I can breathe with this, and then to bring an attitude of caring when I see the suffering, you know, uh, and to try to keep my heart open, but at the same time to protect, so that when I feel the overwhelm, that I step back. So it's really, and of course, all of that requires me to be present, to be mindful. What am I feeling right now? Because if I'm not paying attention, I can easily get caught up and into overwhelm. And so it's that mindfulness is considered to be a protection, right? As the precepts are, so that I'm paying attention. I'm noticing. I want to be engaged in the world, right? I don't want to, hide away. Uh, but I'm noticing, like, am I overdoing it? Am I engaging too much? Or on the other hand, am I withdrawing so much into myself that I'm becoming numb and disconnected? So I have to, really gauge those things. And again, there's no one answer to that. It means that I'm attentive, and and of course that also means that naturally at times I'm going to be out of balance, and that's okay. Like, that's normal, right? Again, for me, it's really important to accept, like, failure, not quite the right word, but accept things when things get imbalanced, and not think, oh, there's something wrong with me that things became imbalanced. It's natural. If everything is impermanent, it can't be in balance, really, for long periods. And so it's natural, and it's okay. Oh, I'm a little, agitated here. I'm activated. I need to step back. Oh, I'm like too numb and withdrawn. I need to step forward. And so just being okay with that and being kind to myself about it. Um, and yeah, I mean, the breath, mindfulness of the breath, is so powerful as just a balancing energy to work with throughout the day. It's something I really lean on. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh really inspired me, particularly with that. The way he talks about one of his books on mindful breathing, he says, I've been practicing mindful breathing for 50 years. And when I read that, I thought, he's not just talking about meditating, he's talking about all the time. And of course, if you ever saw Thich Nhat Hanh speak, or, were in his presence, you saw that, oh yeah, he's trying to be mindful all the time, not just when he's sitting there with his eyes closed. So, those balancing energies, that's to me the key. So I see there was a comment to a question in the chat. How did you overcome addiction? It's a kind of a tricky question. I mean, first of all, I have to say, I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, so Buddhism didn't get me sober, although there are Buddhist recovery programs now, and they're quite effective for people who are willing to engage in the process. But it's really about, for me, it was really about, I mean, there were several layers of it. First of all, nobody wants to admit that they're addicted to something. So we all want to feel like we're in control. So there's a big surrender around saying, I'm really not in control. So that was a huge piece of it. And then there was discovering that not drinking and using was actually fun. That I thought I was having fun when I was high, but it turned out I wasn't really. I was just, numbing myself. So discovering that there was some joy in recovery was really important. So accepting it, discovering that joy, and then I think it's really important to have a very strong determination which comes from realizing it really doesn't work. And this is a Buddhist principle as well. Disenchantment, the Buddha talks about, when we realize that our ordinary ways of living, striving for pleasure, striving for power, striving for accumulation, that they really don't work. And I finally realized, after many years of trying to control my drinking and using, that it really didn't work, and that there was no way of I'll just have a little bit, because that never worked. A little bit always eventually, maybe not that same day, but eventually came back to too much. I might, only have one beer one day, but a week later I'd be in a blackout. And the same with marijuana. If I smoked marijuana one day, I wanted to have it the next day. It's again that causal relationship. The craving builds more, creates more craving. Acting on craving creates more craving. It's again a fundamental Buddhist principle. It's counter to the way people think of things. You think that, if I have a desire and I respond to it, then I'll get rid of the desire. But instead, when you act on desire, it just makes desire come up more often. So, it was a process, but a lot of it, it comes down to surrender on all these levels, and realizing that what I was attached to really wasn't worth very much. It being high didn't really do much for me. I didn't, because I thought I was going to lose something, and I definitely did not lose anything. I gained a whole lot. So, I've written a few books on this. So One Breath at a Time is my best known book, and it goes through kind of Buddhism and the 12 steps and shows how to work a recovery program, or kind of how I got through it, or how I understand it from a Buddhist view. So, other questions from folks? I'm trying to see if I recognize any names on here. I don't think I let enough of my friends know about this, because I would call on them, call them out. But yeah.
There's another question by Leah.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. Do the cravings go away for good eventually, or is it a battle every time? First of all, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. For me, the cravings went away completely and almost immediately, which shocked me. I've never really had a desire to drink or use again. And it's been 40 years. It'll be 40 years in June since I got sober. I think most of the people I interact with who have well-established sobriety, or well-established in their recovery, because it can apply to anything, particularly with drugs and alcohol. Many people just, it goes away. Um, I I've also met people who say that they still have cravings, but I'm talking about drugs and alcohol, and there are other addictions. The food addiction, sex addiction, particularly, are two that are very tricky to manage because with food, for instance, you have to eat every day, and so you're forced to confront your own craving, uh, and so that there is no real easy way out of that. Um, and I think that's where something like harm reduction, if you're familiar with that, becomes more helpful, is to, rather than thinking, because I see that people with food addictions, or whatever we want to call them, often kind of slip, or, have some kind of a relapse. But if they can keep it so that they minimize that, rather than, maybe they can't keep some program perfectly. If they can minimize it, then they're reducing the harm to a level where it's not really doing damage to them. But yeah, I mean, there is no particular, I can't speak for everybody in recovery, but yeah. What is this? Thank you.
I
Don't worry
have a
about the
follow-up
inventory. Yeah,
question.
go.
So you mentioned that for you, the addictions, that it went away immediately. So
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, how long was your
Mm.
um the duration after which it went away completely? Was it like a longer time frame, or
So,
was it like a
Leah, is that how am I pronouncing your name right, Leah, or
yes,
is it?
yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Um,
Thank you so much.
yeah, I mean, I don't, I, I'm not sure it's that helpful for me to set up some model for you. Is this something you're dealing with, or you're trying to work with? Um,
Not specifically.
okay.
I was doing some research on smoking addiction,
Uh-huh.
actually.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be more of my
Yeah.
interest, but
Yes. Smoking is particularly challenging. And I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Craving Mind. Um, that's by Judson Brewer. And he's done research on smoking. And smoking is considered almost the hardest addiction to overcome because it's so embedded in someone's lifestyle. It's something you're doing all day long. Whereas most people who are drinking or taking drugs are doing that at specific times that aren't they're not doing it at work, and when they're driving and when they're with their kids. But with cigarettes, it's very tricky. So what they do with that, with smokers, is they try to show them, get them to pay attention to how long the craving lasts. And according to their research, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but something like this, that when you have the craving for a cigarette, if you don't smoke, within 10 minutes, the sort of the most powerful arc of that fades. Now it comes back. It might come back in 20 minutes or an hour, but when they're trying to teach people that, to really pay attention to the impermanent nature of the craving, so that, because the feeling that craving gives us is that if I don't respond to this, it's going to stay forever. But when we can see that it actually has an arc that fades, then that gives us some motivation. Okay, I can hang in for this 10 minutes, right? I'll have a glass of water. I'll chew some gum. I'll call a friend. I'll just distract myself. Um, and so that's very unique. That's very different from what I had to go through. I was smoking pot, drinking, taking some occasional cocaine, but it was always, most of it was happening at night. I was a musician, and that most of it was like when I was playing a gig. So I could get through a day without drinking. And then when I went to work to play a gig, it'd be like really just the 20-minute breaks. So, I could work around that, right? It was not that challenging. So yeah, it's really worth looking into the ways that mindfulness is applied to cigarette addiction. It is a particularly unique challenge. So I really wish you well with that. But yeah, I'll just put in the name of that book
Thank
in
you.
the chat. It's The Craving Mind by Judson Brewer, and I think it is also helpful to see, like, he takes you through the way that craving arises and how, and the primal quality of it that comes from evolution, from that's addressed in behavioral science. So yeah, thank you.
There's just another comment.
Oh, good.
Gone. She says, "Thank you. I worry about the younger generation and their ability to cope, leading to being addicted, attachment to something. Example: alcohol, drugs, money, attention, titles, etc." I don't know if that's how.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a question. I worry about them too. I worry about everybody, but I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that the biggest addiction right now is to phones, and it's not just the younger generation, but particularly the younger generation. And I saw a woman. You can see it every day, every minute. You go outside, but there was just one image that caught my attention one day. A woman who was walking her dog, and she was looking at her phone, and the dog was pulling, trying to smell something. And I thought, oh, there's two versions of craving right there, but they're very different, and yet they're the same. Like, she's just like the dog that's trying to smell the pea on the tree over there, just like caught. And the fact that she was walking her dog, but she wasn't paying attention to her dog, that seemed kind of sad. It's like, you have a dog, it's cute, enjoy your walk with your dog. So yeah, I mean, the bigger point from the Dharma is that we have addictive minds. Our minds are very prone to addictive behavior, and people who are trying to make money figure out how to trigger addictive behaviors. So whether you're making potato chips or smartphones, or cigarettes, you're playing on human nature, human tendencies, the tendency of craving. And so we're all faced with this one way or another. Addiction isn't something that's unique to, just this special bad people who are addicts. I get it. Everybody has addictive behaviors to one degree or another. It's just a question of whether it becomes really a problem or harmful. But I do think that the smartphone addiction is the biggest one today. In fact, I've read that young people are actually drinking and using drugs less now because they get their addictive craving addressed through their phones. I don't know if that's true. A lot of things are out there. It looks like Dawn followed that up by saying, how do delusions arise? Well, in the Buddhist model, delusions are the starting point of the whole path, the whole arc of dependent origination that leads to suffering. So delusions arise. How do they arise? Again, it's just, they arise out of the lack of wisdom, essentially, because wisdom is the opposite of delusion. So delusion is believing things that aren't true, being misguided. And again, in Buddhist terms, we could call it wrong view. So a delusion is if I get enough money, then I'll be happy and satisfied, right? If I get drunk enough, I'll be happy and satisfied. If I have enough sex, I'll be okay, you know. And that's not understanding how suffering arises. So it's just a very basic primal human tendency, because we have this innate feeling that when there's craving, it needs to be satisfied, and that it can be satisfied, and that by acting on the craving, it will resolve something. And that is the heart of delusion. And it's only through wisdom that we undercut that we realize that that's not true, and that we, come into a different relationship with our experience. But it requires a lot of vigilance, because delusion is very persistent. We're deeply conditioned to be ignorant or to be deluded. And that's why persistent mindfulness, vigilant mindfulness is so important, because we fall back into those tendencies so easily. Sometimes I get excited. I mean, the Dharma is beautiful, and I might not have all the answers, but the Dharma definitely has all the answers. Okay, you're welcome, Don. So, Georgia, I want to tell you that, because Spanish is such a common language in U.S. and particularly California, I assumed your name was pronounced Jorge, and I tried to tell Vince that last night, but you corrected me, but not by saying what your name was. And so is that the Portuguese pronunciation? Is that
Portuguese pronunciation is Jorge.
Jorge? Oh,
Jorge.
I love that. Yeah.
That's why there's no problem at all. George, I was born in Belgian Congo, so
Wow.
I was the first time my name was written was in French, Georges. So
Georges, oui.
People know me as Georges. English people know me as George. And usually Americans tend to, which is natural, I think, to call me Jorge, because
Yeah.
And I have to admit that at some point it did trigger me, because we have a very long love and hate relationship with Spain, which is just across the border.
Yes, well, we always have the biggest problems with our neighbors.
Exactly, but
Yes.
that's not an issue for me. I mean, I have this whole big community has just taught me that we're all close to each other. So
Yeah.
it's even sometimes people want to say it in a very specific way, and it becomes even more trickier than just saying whatever.
Right. Let's not worry about it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you, George.
So I
yeah,
don't know if you want to.
I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll invite me back again.
Oh, I will. I hope you will accept my invitation.
I will, absolutely.
Yes,
of
because
course.
we had a very nice. I think it was a wonderful session.